violinist or an artist or a school teacher, a mother, a grandmother, plumber, electrician, and you're good, or the president of the United States, you're good at what you do, you've had some achievement in your life, but inside you feel unworthy. And the issue is self-worth is your inside self. It's not the persona you project to the world. It's who you are in your core, what I call my soul self, your core being. And that really is the way you live your life. It affects everything about you. It affects your energy, your attitude, your sexuality, your ability to manage your life, productivity, concentration, sleep, immunity. It is so vital to the quality of your life. And I'd never read anything or seen anything that really, hit home with me that said self-worth is the pulse of your life. Yeah. And until you realize that you do have value, it's going to be very difficult to find meaning. And no amount of external accomplishments or material wealth will ever be enough to quell that void of low self-worth. And so that's where I really went with my material.
So how were you able to go from 0 there to 10, so to speak, in terms of that internal thing? What practices helped you to do that? I assume it was a struggle.
It was. And it takes time. And I think that's one of the predominant issues to make in our conversation is that people want immediate change.
Right.
They change themselves. I'm counseling a few people right now, suicidal people, one gentleman in particular who lost someone he was madly in love with and is heartbroken and can't seem to do anything. He's having a hard time functioning. And the issue is they're looking outside of themselves for their own salvation, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But we really have to turn inwardly, and most people don't necessarily want to do that. But I know from my research that the only way to create sustainable change for yourself in your thoughts and behavior is it has to come from something within. It cannot be forced upon you by someone else. It can't be something you think you should do. For instance, losing weight. Everybody wants to lose, I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to exercise. That's the most commonly heard, transformative behavioral change that people want to make.
Yeah.
The reason people are not successful is because they are doing it for the wrong reasons. And so you have to really dig down deep and think, who am I really? Who do I want to be? And one of the interviews that I had, Dr. Richard Boyatzis, which was so inspiring to me, was that we try to do things because we think we should. And that doesn't lead to sustainable change. When you intellectualize a problem, you're spending too much time trying to be rational about it. Whereas when you're emotional and you're passionate and you desire change to occur, that's when you're driven. That's when you'll have the tenacity to stick with it. And so what I did was I did all this research. I also interviewed, after the fact, interviewed experts all over the world and a lot of trauma survivors. And that confirmed, in my mind, that until you are really able to unearth what has happened to you without spending a lot of time on your past, because your past is your past and you are who you are today, but understanding your past and why you became the way you are today. That's very important. It's kind of a mix of humanistic psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy, where you do have to understand what happened, but you are also dealing with where you want your life to go. And so I did a lot of not searching, but just understanding of how I came to be the way I was. And then developed these practices that I had an incident. I was out of town this past week. I had an incident with my brother that completely took me into this state of where I was going back to when I was a little girl again. And I came right back and I said, okay, back to my practices of gaining perspective first, self-reflecting, and doing my meditation and deep breathing, because life is dynamic. And as you said, from 0 to 10, I'm not 10.
Okay.
Right. I'm always vacillating between an 8, 9, whatever. But the truth is that you are constantly adjusting and flexible. And that's part of developing self-worth, is being
Yeah.
able to respond to circumstances and have the inner strength and resilience to come back to your centeredness. And so that's what I learned. That's probably the biggest thing. And the second thing is that anyone can change, but it takes the effort, the desire, and time.
And time, yeah. You, it seemed like journaling was one very important tool for you. You talk about self-reflection, and I would think that journaling would be a lot about self-reflection.
It is. And writing is, and I don't even, I mean, I write everything on a computer, but I still journal by hand, because the process of writing something down is so remarkable in terms of taking it out of your brain and making it concrete. And that action is truly magnificent in terms of just objectifying it from yourself, detaching it from you, and also saying, this is real. This isn't something I'm imagining. This is how I feel. And and then it gives you the platform to go back and review those notes and say, okay, that issue with my brother regurgitated things that happened to me when I was younger. So what was it? And you identify those triggers, things that he said, the way he said them. Those triggers are so important. They're cues that bring you back, and you say, okay, I'm not there anymore. I'm here. So here's what I'm going to do to transcend these feelings of hurt, these feelings of disrespect. And so as much as you say as much as I say that I have self-worth, life is a work in progress. We are constantly working on things, and we are constantly facing challenges and losing people we love. So it is a dynamic flow.
Yeah.
It's, oh, you achieve self-worth and all of a sudden you're this, Teflon person. That's not it.
Right. I'm so glad to hear you say that. And I've sort of inwardly cringed when I said 0 to 10. It's just how it came out. But I totally believe that, just as you're saying, that life is a process, and I tend to be distrustful of anybody who presents themselves as a finished work.
There's no such thing. And
Yeah.
nor do you want it to be. Because, as you've heard over and over, life is a journey, not a destination. But it is a journey. And through neuroplasticity, which you've talked about often in your podcasts, I use that in my book as a scientific basis, because people say, I can't change, I've tried. No, you can change. But you have to repeat those practices over and over for a certain amount of time. So you create the new neural pathways and the synapses that basically create behavior. And it's possible for anyone to change, which is so illuminating, when you think about it. People who have lived their entire lives with self-doubt and low self-regard or low self-respect can, at any age in their life, they can regain that by just self-understanding and self-acceptance.
Yeah. And you talk about the neuroplasticity, and is part of your practice involve affirmations,
It does.
right? Putting in new, new input.
Positive self-talk really works, just like athletes I talk about in my book. Athletes are constantly, and any performers, ballerinas, singers, anyone that has to be on stage or perform at a high level, peak level, they talk to themselves because they motivate themselves. And
Mhm.
I mean, I'm constantly saying, okay, how do you want to address this issue? It's not what you wanted to hear or see, but how do you want to feel about it? How do you want to process it? And that self-talk, and you say you have the ability to deal with anything that life throws at you. And I love the Dalai Lama, because the Dalai Lama, and I have this tapestry in my office, and he writes about the ability to maintain a healthy, peaceful state of mind is learning inside that the world can be falling down around you, but you can be okay with it because you have the ability to transcend it, to have the resilience and the inner strength to get through it, because life is going to continue to give
Right.
you challenges.
Yeah.
And positive self-talk, I mean, understanding triggers is one of the foremost important things. And that,
Yeah. I wanted to go back to that. It's one of the major topics in your book, and it's also the piece maybe that comes from the behavioral, cognitive behavioral therapy and so on. I think is to, and it's an interesting, for me, an interesting meeting place between meditation and it's about noticing, right? It's about becoming aware of the triggers and being alert enough to notice them.
yes, and that takes practice,
Yeah.
just like meditation, and a lot of deep breathing exercises. It takes practice to finally feel calm when you're dealing with certain triggers. For example,
Right.
a trigger was criticism because I was bullied. And so whenever I received some form of criticism, even if it wasn't real criticism, it was kind of just a reaction, like you really shouldn't have done that way or something, an opposite opinion, let's say, from mine. I perceived it as criticism. And then even deeper, it was rejection. So the
Uh,
criticism was on the outside, but deep within me, I was thinking, I'm being rejected again. And I
Again.
observe it, and I get into this, amygdala part of my brain where I cortisol rising, and I try to flee. But what happens when you find, and that this relates to journaling too, because it's very important to write down and acknowledge the triggers or the cues in your life that send you into this whirlwind kind of
Mhm.
area of your brain and your mind where you're very emotional and not able to control or manage your feelings. And so I would write down what the triggers were. Okay, so fear of rejection, distrust, insecurity about certain things, lack of acceptance, whatever they are for you. So the triggers would be criticism, anger from someone else, a song, for instance, something you eat. It can be anything, a photograph. If it sends you into a state of feeling overwhelmed and fearful, then you know that trigger has a lot of power over you. And the key is to start recognizing and observing it. And what I call in my book, catch it before it falls, meaning
Yeah.
observe it, witness it, comprehend it, and then flow past it. And so don't allow it to change your mindset or your attitude. Just observe it, let it flow through you. And the more you practice that, the less that trigger will have power over you. And I'm telling you, there are a lot of triggers in this world. I had so
Yeah.
many, but
Well, what do you think about the social phenomenon that's going on in universities, particularly where students, where professors are feeling like they have to tiptoe around the content for fear that somebody is going to get triggered or somebody will go and complain to the administration that this professor is brutal because they went into a topic that was painful.
it's a very,
That's a big issue right now, I think.
very delicate subject. And it's not just in colleges and universities. It's endemic now because of the sexual harassment stuff and,
Yeah.
saying something that you accidentally may have said the wrong way, and the perception. And especially the new kids are so sensitive to the rise in bigotry and bullying and racism and the white fascism and all that stuff that's rising again. It's a very delicate tight wire. And I think that there has to be an understanding. The professor has to know its audience. Just like when you give a speech, you really want to know what do they want to derive out of this speech. A professor needs to know that he's got kids from extremely diverse backgrounds, and he or she has to be very sensitive to the needs of today, because otherwise her material is not going to be valid. It's not going to be relevant. And so there are a lot of topics. My daughter's taking a subject right now at college that they stream all over the world. So they have people from New Zealand to Japan,
Wow.
everywhere. They're bringing in, you talk about manifold perspectives. And her professor challenges them. It says, well, what if you were Black? How do you feel about a white person? Does it matter? And he comes up with these really controversial, but he has faith in his students that they're not going to get hysterical or violent, that they'll be able to discuss it in a mature, reasonable manner. And I think teaching kids how to understand what's going on in the world today and not take everything so personally is very important to dialogue. It's very important to growth, because the
Yeah.
minute you internalize something and take it personally, it loses its meaning. It loses its applicability. Now it's about you and not about the subject itself. I think that teachers, professors, in any coaches, parents in particular, have to be more sensitive to the new age that we're living in, which is riddled with negativity and bullying, and there's so much stuff going on, and you've got to be sensitive to it.
I think you're right. I think some of the professors